My name is Dan. This is Michael. We're here coming from Figma. We're going to tell you about our journey to building FigJam AI. You might know Figma as a tool for designers, but we're doing a lot more than that. We're building a platform for teams to develop products and to collaborate more effectively. And part of this story is this tool called FigJam. This is what Michael and I work on. FigJam is a whiteboarding tool that provides users with a 2D canvas to do brainstorms, do diagrams, run meetings, do retrospectives, and all sorts of interesting things that are up-level the way you can work with your teams. It's pretty fun, so I recommend you try it out if you haven't given it a chance. This talk is going to be about how, in the process we went through to incorporate AI into FigJam. It was a learning-heavy experience, and I would like to tell you a lot more about that. Our company and our leaders were thinking a lot about ways to incorporate machine learning, large language models, diffusion models, all this stuff that is rapidly changing with AI into our products. And last year, we scheduled a company-wide hackathon to get everybody thinking about trying out, prototyping, and learning from building AI features into our products. And so what I'm going to do first is tell you a mini story of something that came out of this. We had a lot of ideas, but one idea I was personally really interested in was this notion of a more visual version of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT has been incredible. The conversational language-based interface goes a long way, but it's not ideal for every use case. And so if you want to do some ideation, research a topic, or anything that requires you to explore multiple branches, dig into something, maybe tinker with some ideas, it's just not that natural to do it as a linear conversation. And so we wanted to explore this as a team, and we had some ideas, and so we worked on this on the hackathon. And we ended up building, at first we called it JamGPT. So it's like ChatGPT, the visual version of that is JamGPT. We later had to rebrand it a little bit for our naming guidelines, but what we built was this prototype to have a few targeted functions to generate stuff in the FigJam canvas and then go with the flow. Our leadership team, and specifically Dylan, our CEO, really liked this idea. And so when we demoed this, he was like, can we actually make something out of this? Can we make it real? And we're like, sure. But then the caveat was there was this really promising and amazing marketing moment coming up with a conference at Andreessen Horowitz called AI Revolutions. So Dylan was going to be talking as part of that, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. But then it's actually coming up in 2 to 3 weeks, and we're like, don't know about that. But we decided to go for it. I think we had some pretty good learnings as part of our hackathon explorations, and we wanted to be really scrappy with this anyway. And so we got a whole virtual team together. We worked really rapidly to define the product, the design, our kind of GTM and marketing strategy. A lot of the copy for this was really interesting. And at the end of this 2 to 3 weeks, we had something going that Dylan was able to talk about at the conference, and it generated a lot of excitement. A lot of people saw this as a novel way of interacting with AI, where you actually have a set of functions like ideate or learn about a topic or show me things that are similar to this or code this up or even turn this into a poem. And so it's really interesting. We shipped it as a widget. So it was fairly scrappy. It wasn't really integrated into our product, but it generated good buzz and inspired the community. And just last week, actually, the company won an award from Fast Company, recognizing it as one of the most innovative companies doing applied AI because of Jambot. So pretty proud about that, and a shout out to the team who built this. Well, thank you. And now to switch to the main topic of our talk. Roughly at the same time, we were thinking really deeply about how do we want to use AI to solve some of our key user problems with FigJam. And one of the most obvious and recurrent problems that our users had was what we called a blank canvas problem. So when users come in and see an infinite canvas, they often get overwhelmed. They don't know how to get started, what to use FigJam for. And we had some solutions for this. One of them is static templates. So there's a lot of content that the community has built that like people can just like repurpose and try to use for the use cases. But it has a lot of limitations, especially like getting really detailed on like what you actually want to do with FigJam. And so we were thinking, and some of us are really interested in this notion of like, can we actually use AI for this? Can we take a prompt and magically, dynamically generate something visually on the canvas? It seemed like it could work. Like on paper, like you could think like, yeah, man, we can ask ChatGPT to maybe have a detailed description of what should go on the board, and then we turn it into like visual elements. And so we pitched this to our leadership team, and they were like, okay, we got buy-off to run a 4-week like limited time investigation to explore some of these concepts. We had a few questions we knew we wanted to answer, and then just in general, we wanted to understand what was possible at the time with LLMs. And so one of them is this thing I mentioned on like, can we take a free-form prompt and turn it into something like meaningful that people can get started with on their canvas? Can we generate meaningful variations depending on what people might want to do? Can we like actually like transform and extrapolate content? And so we jumped at this. The format and the setup was 4 weeks. After every week, we would have a demo, and then we would quickly learn and pivot based on whatever we were finding. And the progress was pretty incredible. Like Michael here stepped to lead the investigation, and just a few days, like we actually had a demo using our internal widget infrastructure where you could type something and then generate stuff that seemed reasonable. Like I was pretty mind blown in our first demo because you could type stuff like, I don't know, brainstorm for an ice cream party and actually like generate sections with stickies and things that like kind of made sense even at the level of the text that was generated. So we got really excited, and that level of progress continued for like several weeks into the investigation. We learned a ton. We were able to like find potential routes on like how to structure our prompts. We find ways to like interpret and represent content on the canvas, and we even find ways to like shortcut a lot of our like technical challenges. So, as an example, one of the things that people use FigJam for is diagramming, and GPT already knows and is aware of a format called Mermaid, and so we could just ask it, hey, generate something in Mermaid format, and then we can take that and like convert it into primitives on FigJam. And so we had a lot of learnings like this. At that point, we demoed this to our leadership team again, and that generated excitement. At that point, it was like, yes, this is cool. Now I get it, and we want to pursue this. And so we decided to turn this into a work stream, or actually 2 projects. One was this initial idea of like, from a free-form prompt, generate a template-like board. And then the other one was leaning into one of our key use cases with diagramming, just like go deeper on that, like generate something that feels good for like org charts and flow charts and things like that. And so we're pretty hyped. At this time, there was also both a recognition and a decision from our company and our marketing team that we wanted to go big with AI. So we were seeing how our competitors were doing a lot of AI features. There was a lot of potential here, and they saw what we had in plan, and they were like, this is actually new. Like, there's no other company that has done this. And so we decided to bundle everything we were working on at the time. And this included other features like summarizing content on the board, clustering and sorting some of the elements on the canvas. And we're gonna do a mega launch by the end of the year, and we're gonna lead with this generate work as a marquee headline of our GTM story. And so at that point, we were pretty hyped. We started working on this. Our designer, Natasha, came up with some incredible initial designs, and we started executing on this. But then reality hitting. One of the first things we realized was that all of the fast progress we saw with the initial explorations was not extrapolating the way we thought into just continuing to turn it into something that we could ship. The progress from like iterating on our prompts was highly nonlinear. And so it seemed like there was one day that there would be a big breakthrough, and then a week where like nothing happened, or we would like change something and fix something and break 3 other things, and that started to actually like be concerning. And after some time working on this, we found ourselves in a place where the actual like templates and its quality was pretty unremarkable. Like it was still feeling like just sections with stickies, but not something where we would go and do a big splash from a marketing perspective by any means. Costs were, quite frankly, just a non-starter. Like if we did the math on like every time someone types a prompt and hits send, we have to pay OpenAI this amount of money. It just like it didn't add up, even for something that would ship us as a beta feature. And then perf was not good either. Like the generation was taking like 40 to 50 seconds, and like no one's gonna like wait all that time. And it was before we even like finished all the stuff that we wanted to add. And so this felt concerning, and all of these things were also a tension with each other. So like we had some ideas on like we can expand our prompts, but that's going to add more tokens, which means more cost, and maybe that's going to translate into worse perf. And so we were starting to get a little bit worried, and the targets were also pretty unclear. So like the expectations of quality were not obvious. So to give you an example, if someone types a prompt saying, hey, I want to run a brainstorm for my marketing campaign of X, like they could mean, yeah, you want to run a full activity with your team with an icebreaker, some product contest, a synthesis, and all of this. Or you might want to like a quick brainstorm with a peer. Similarly, like you might want to like lead with content that is inspirational, like just ideas on like what you could do. Or it could be educational to show you what FigJam can do. Or it could be more like utilitarian and to the point of like, yeah, you can get started on this right away. And it's not like there's right or wrong answers here, and we all had different intuitions on like what would make more sense, but we needed to get on the same page. And on top of this, there was LLM issues around hallucinations and inconsistencies and just like random stuff. Like we literally had a problem, a bug in Asana called sticky monsters. Because out of nowhere, GPT would decide to output a ton of stickies and the board would just look insane. And it was kind of funny, but it was also like quite worrisome and unpredictable. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and rethink our approach. And Michael here is going to tell you about how we solved it.
Hi, my name is Michael Bullington. I'm an engineer on the FigJam team. And along with the team, I led the investigation for AI templates and helped develop it into the product you see today. So yeah, at this point in our product lifecycle, we had three main challenges, as Dan mentioned, that were actually pretty concerning: cost, speed, and output quality. Usually, if you think of a triangle, you have like two, but not three, but we had none. And so cost related back to, surprisingly enough, the user experience we wanted to offer. And you might ask, how does that actually relate back? But our goal for this feature set, this launch, was to introduce new audiences to FigJam and help them become better visual communicators. FigJam is a 2D canvas, which many people are unfamiliar with. And so having something on the board that they can edit and feel like they have control over is actually highly valuable. This was kind of the story we wanted to do, but the cost was making that prohibitive. Our pricing and packaging partners, we had conversations with that were honestly a bit awkward. It was like, hey, this is kind of really expensive. Like, hey, maybe only enterprise users should be able to use this. Or maybe they should only generate 2 or 3 a day. And so there weren't any good answers really, but we were getting further away from the product experience we wanted to offer. Same with speed. Speed, as Dan mentioned, took around 40 to 50 seconds to generate a template. So you would type in a prompt, you would hit generate, you'd see a spinner, it would keep spinning, it would keep spinning. You would think there would be an error somewhere, and then eventually that like a template would pop out. And that was pretty far from the level of interactivity that I think Figma and FigJam are known for. And we didn't want to diminish that quality bar with our feature. We wanted, if anything, to raise the floor of that quality bar. And third, output quality. The speed would be somewhat forgivable if at the end of that 40, 50 seconds, you had like the most amazing template ever. Like it was so amazing, your mind like was blown and the world had changed. But that wasn't the case. our output quality was at the point where we wanted to take your intent and express it the best way we thought possible in FigJam. But FigJam AI, at this time, kind of struggled to express what FigJam was good at. So in extrapolating our early progress, we looked at this a little and we're like, what gives? Why are we having these types of problems when building large language model applications? From a first principles perspective, we just kind of stepped back, and using very plain language, I think it's fair to say GPT is just a very advanced text predictor. It predicts text based on what it already knows, what it has read, and it is better at tasks that it has seen more of. So for example, you ask it to generate HTML, JavaScript, it's very, very good at that. It's seen that hundreds of thousands of times. And that's what this ball represents. This ball represents things that it's seen at a high density and things that I don't have to tell you it's good at. That's the magic of ChatGPT. However, your domain-specific problem, as was ours, might be a little further out from this ball. GPT knows what FigJam is, but it has never seen a FigJam template before. It does not know what leads to the most conductive experience in FigJam. And so we have to find ways of closing this gap, which is through product decisions. Ultimately, many more product decisions than you expect. I'm not sure, folks in the room, if you've developed large language model applications before, but codifying the latent behavior of what makes your product good in itself is an act of introspection. And that's a required step in this process for then teaching a model to work within those bounds. And so how we solved this was, in a way, through shortcuts. We wanted our North Star goal of a template generator to show the best FigJam experience possible. But we had to approach it from a different angle. Instead of top-down, we wanted to do bottom-up. Find a few use cases that have outsized levels of impact, optimize towards those in our prompting and in our evaluations, and then extrapolate from there. And so these are wise words from Albert, the product manager on our team and the product manager for this project. We realized with our MVP, we could not make a template generator for everything, but we could make a template generator for weekly meetings, team retros, and brainstorms. And so just to reiterate, one thing we found immensely valuable through this launch is free-form prompting. We want to take the context that you have about your team, what you're trying to do, and add what makes FigJam special into it. It's just we needed to approach it from a different perspective. Again, from first principles, the very first thing we did after this pivot was say, if I'm to use this file, what sections would actually lead to a conductive experience? And through that process, we actually broke up the problem. So before we would ask GPT, generate a template, we would use few-shot examples, which we still use in our pipeline, and I'll talk about a bit later. And we just expected it to come up with this amazing template. However, now there's a pre-step where we say, actually, I just want you to make an outline. What do you think would be most conductive? And through that process, we can actually better inform the model on the kind of output we want. We know what leads to a good weekly meeting, so we want to tell the model that. And so this was our first abstraction. Outputs are now a horizontal list of sections. From this pivot and this decision, kind of all of our risk areas then follow. We were able to optimize for cost, speed, output quality, and ultimately get the project back on track. So before with cost, as I mentioned, we had one long GPT-4 prompt. We just asked it to make a template. Again, we used few-shot examples, which are highly valuable. Not really the focus of this talk, but we still use them extensively. And we just hoped for the best. However, by breaking our problem up, we were able to implement what is known as a prompt chain. So a single template request in FigJam is now actually multiple GPT calls switched together. And by stitching those together, we're able to give the model more product instruction for the user experience we're looking for, and also more guidance. We found through this process, and how it relates back to cost, that actually, if we help the model reason in this way, we no longer need state-of-the-art model performance in order to get what we're looking for. So you might ask, like, why would I not use the best model available? At the time, we were using GPT-4. GPT-4 is really great. However, it's not, at the time, necessarily cheap. Input tokens add up. And also, smaller, more scalable models, like 3.5 Turbo or others, but we're working with GPT for this project, like, are faster, are cheaper by significant levels of magnitude. And those are real savings that your team can benefit from. So we used a smaller GPT model, 3.5 Turbo, and by using more input tokens, actually significantly more than our initial approach, it was still 5 times cheaper. Depending on your project, the savings may be more or less, but these are real tangible benefits that your team can benefit from. Second is speed. As I mentioned before, we implemented a prompt chain, meaning multiple GPT calls are now stitched together. In our previous approach, we had to generate one section, then another section, then another section after that. There was really no choice. That's how a GPT prompt works. But with our prompt chain, we were able to say, do these sections actually need to be generated one after the other? And the answer we arrived at is no. So we found tasks generating activities that we can actually parallelize. So if you look at this chart here, you can see some of our initial steps might take up to a second, and then filling out an activity takes 10 seconds. But that's fine, because you can do 4 of them at once. And just that change, in addition to our model changes, brought our time from 40 seconds down to 15. But I don't know, this is still not good enough. We can kind of do better. One of the things we really leaned into was if you talk to GPT, it doesn't like think about the answer, come up with a paragraph, and then dump a document back at you. It starts talking in a way that you and I might talk, or you might talk to a friend or colleague. And so we had an interesting design space of what is the equivalent of that on a 2D canvas. And our design partner, Natasha, did a really good job at this. We collaborated with her quite a bit. But ultimately, what we ended up with was the concept of streaming. Users start seeing content as soon as the first pass finishes. And once we implemented this change, speed aside, what we were interested in was we received feedback from the users we were targeting, people who wanted to become visual communicators in FigJam, who said, by streaming, I actually feel like the model is showing me its work. I feel as if the model is creating the sections and then putting in stickies, widgets, and other relevant content in a way I might be able to replicate. So streaming is not only a speed improvement, it's also a way of educating users on how to incrementally use your product. So our templates still take around 15 seconds to generate, but the user gets very active feedback after about a second. And lastly, output quality. So as Dan mentioned, our output quality was originally somewhat nebulous. We wanted it to be better. We knew what we wanted, but we struggled in some ways to articulate that. And closing this gap requires product decisions, many more than you might think or we initially thought. And so through this process was actually a really great opportunity to highlight and bring on some of our cross-functional partners. We brought on Katie. Katie is our designer advocate. And through Katie's work, Katie actually worked to say, here are the type of sections that are relevant. Here are the widgets, stickers, and other resources that make something lead to the most conductive experience. And this is just knowledge we didn't have as engineers as much. Natasha, our designer, worked with us on people who want to be visual communicators in FigJam want artifacts that feel beautiful. They want to feel as if a designer made them. So how do you describe that? That's what Natasha worked on. And it's a hard problem, and I think we arrived at a pretty good solution. And lastly, Albert, our product manager, lastly but not, there's many more people. Albert, our product manager, worked with us to, again, find use cases that could have outsized impact. And then qualify those. Say, here is a list of prompts I think users will use most or lead to the most conductive experience. We can optimize around those. So define what quality means for your team. You may know what better looks like, but being able to articulate that is invaluable for building large language model applications. And for us, some of the big ones were visual design, top-level structure, layout, and content. And you can actually see an example here. We leaned a bit in our development process into manual evaluations in FigJam. So we would generate a FigJam template. We would go through with our designer advocate, our product manager, the rest of the engineering team, and say, is this any good? And by qualifying what we wanted and how we were going to measure it, we were able to say, structural relevance for weekly syncs, how does that look? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's just super valuable for then being able to brainstorm on solutions to those problems and getting that iteration loop and that flywheel that'll ultimately get you to the bar that you want for your user experience. And lastly, I'd say there's a tendency to think GPT or large language models should handle everything, but there's actually a lot of cases where you just might know best. And if you find any of those, I would highly recommend faking it in the sense where originally we had GPT assign colors to different sections, but we struggled with contrast ratios. We struggled with adhering to our palette in a way that was sensible. I paired with our designer, Natasha, and we just decided, we know which colors we should probably use. There's a bit of randomization, but the heuristic doesn't use GPT at all. And in the same way, spacing between children. So say if you have a section with stickies in it, how far should the stickies be away from each other? And originally you could say, GPT should kind of know, but I don't know if GPT needs to know necessarily. So what we implemented, again, was another heuristic that takes the size of the children and adheres it to a metric scale that we collaborated with our designer, Natasha, on. So yeah, definitely there are cases where as a team, as designers, as developers, as cross-functional partners, you might know best. And don't be afraid to incorporate that into the product. Now, you can make it real. There's still some challenges associated with that, and definitely some wins as well. I'm happy to have Dan talk through that.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. So, yeah, I guess we were going through all these problems around getting our GPTs to work the way we wanted, but at the same time, we had to turn this into a product that would be useful for our users, that we would feel proud about. And there were a lot of considerations beside the core AI problems to figure out and take care of. So AI was the core of this. AI can truly up-level a lot of our features, and it's going to be incrementally a big part of our strategy. But you still have to build a product for users, and you have to think through the end-to-end user flows that make sense. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out where should users first be exposed to this? What are the different entry points? What is the onboarding experience for this? Once they land on a prompt interface, what should that look like? Should we be prescriptive? Should we be open-ended? Should we suggest prompts? Should we just enable people to choose use cases? And so we put a lot of thought into this. We had a lot of work to do to have the engineering systems be ready for us to ship this to all our users. So this was one of the first use cases where we were taken to production for a lot of our underlying ML platforms and systems. And so we had to do all due diligence around stress testing and validation and incorporating things like moderation and all of this to make sure that we felt good about what we were going to ship to users. And also, we wanted to tell a good story. So it wasn't just about the product and the system, but like how we tell our users what this is about, like who this is for, what they can do with it, was also really key to our launch plans. And so we worked together on all of this. We solved a lot of the problems and got to a point where we felt good. And then we launched it. We launched it November last year. It was really exciting. We got pretty good reception. Dylan, our CEO, talked about this at Bloomberg TV, and we had a lot of kind of a response from the community on, yeah, this is something I hadn't seen before. This is a way of like generating content in our canvas that just feels different and feels good, and there's a lot of potential here. And people were using it in ways that we didn't really anticipate, even though we kind of like anchor and specialize on specific use cases, as Michael mentioned. So it was great. It was a success by pretty much all measures. It was the biggest launch we had pretty much since the initial unveiling of the product. And of the things I can mention, I can say that people who are using these generative features tend to use them and use the outputs a lot more than like those who are using, let's say, static templates. And they tend to take those artifacts and share them more. And in general, like a lot of the behaviors that we want our users to follow, they were being encouraged and grown by the uses of our AI features. So this was great. We feel really happy about it, and we had a ton of learnings. And so to recap, I want to walk through some of the main takeaways we had as part of this process. So the first one is we're calling it tech explorations. So there was a little bit of that with the hackathon and Jambot, and there was a lot of that with the initial 4-week investigation for Generate. But generally, like people do prototyping, and sure, it's great, but it's becoming a lot more important. And we tend to think of like just walking back from user value. And it's generally a bad practice to say you have a hammer and you're looking for nails, but it seems to us like the dynamic is changing a little bit with AI and the rapid pace of change. So like if you have a hammer, and that the hammer itself is changing so rapidly, so the next day is, I don't know, some kind of laser cutter or a 3D printer. Like if every day is just changing so fast, you kind of have to walk forward from that a little bit as well, and like realize just what is possible and have that meet with walking back from user value, because there might be things that you didn't know were possible or value that you didn't even anticipate before. And so we're leaning really quite heavily into tech explorations, both with what we've done and what we're doing for subsequent work. And we've learned a lot about actually how to do them and what works. Because one of the big takeaways we had was this problem of extrapolating incorrectly based on what we saw from initial progress and initial like outcomes of using LLMs. And so we have since gotten a lot better on like knowing where to dig, not necessarily from the point of view of like having something that seems to work end to end, but more like the risk in certain areas. Like, is cost going to be a concern? Like, do we see a problem with like generalizing from one use case to other? Like, what are the key things that we have to de-risk, and that really double down on those and iterate rapidly on our tech explorations. So then the other thing we touched on a couple of times is that the target, at least in our case, isn't necessarily clear, and it's really important to get really crisp on that. Like, what better means could vary quite a bit based on your product, based on like just the different intuitions that people have. And so like when you think about like what you're doing, it might be like, do you want to have meaningful content? Do you want more relevance? Do you want something that looks visually appealing? Do you want to make room for, I don't know, for people to collaborate or like workshop? And like that can vary a lot depending on what you're doing. But it was really important for us to get really crisp on those, and specifically, as Michael was saying, like get the details on like what do we actually want. So that was pretty key. And then once you have that, like breaking the problem up was also essential. It sounds obvious, but it's not really clear in practice sometimes how you do that. Like if you want to have someone working on just highlighting the best of FigJam and someone else to work on, I don't know, making things look visually appealing, like how do you structure things so that like these teams can actually like work in parallel and iterate, so we can just like break the problem map and have everything come together. And lastly, there's also an argument for cheating. Like there's cases where you don't actually have to rely on LLMs. Like you either know better or right now the technology is not at that stage and you can actually like codify some of this knowledge and get this going faster and potentially better than trying to solve all your problems with AI. And then I'll finish by saying that like this type of work in our experience requires a lot of tinkering, a lot of iteration. And as a company, we have this value called play, where like we actually want to encourage people to try things out or learn. And this has been pretty important all the way through the hackathon, to our explorations, to a lot of the pivots we had to do during the project. It required just like quickly adjusting our plans and learning in the go. And there's also something to optimism. Like it's hard to overstate how important it was for us to like continue to believe that this is going to work. In some cases, we were somewhat misguided on our optimism. That actually proved good because we might not have pursued some of this had we thought it was as hard as it was. And in general, I think we've seen that there's just a lot of latent knowledge and reasoning on LLMs that like you just have to work through them and persevere and stay optimistic that it's going to work. And yeah, and it did for us. And it was a big cross-functional effort, as Michael mentioned. We had a lot of input from design and from product and engineering and designer advocates and copy, like all of that, like actually come into like what is actually a great board and try to incorporate all of that into our code and our prompts was really important. And this is actually like opening the door for a lot more people to contribute. So really happy about this. And we have more stuff coming up. Pretty soon we're gonna be doing a fast follow on some of the generated features, so keep an eye on this. And we also have a big conference coming up in June. Config is our yearly conference. The speaker lineup is really interesting this time, and we can't wait to see you there. If you're interested, you'll learn a lot more about AI plans there. So that's all. Thank you.